I thought silence was the worst thing that could happen to me, until the day I got my hearing back. After 4 weeks of living in a world without sound, I stood in the hallway and heard my wife whisper to her mother words so cold, so cruel, they split something inside me. She didn't know I could hear again. And what she said, it shattered everything I believed about love, loyalty, and the person I thought I married. My name is Noah Vale, and this is the story I never imagined I'd have to tell. But before I share it with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reaches. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about a man trying to climb out of the quietest heartbreak he's ever known. I used to think I understood what stability felt like. My name is Noah Vale, 31, a software engineer tucked into a quiet corner of Boulder, Colorado, where I spent most days working from home and believing that a peaceful life was something you could build with enough patience and kindness. I was always the introverted one in the room, the kind of man who preferred listening over speaking, and for a long time that seemed to balance perfectly with Marissa Hale, the woman I married. People around us thought we were solid, healthy, enviable even. And for a while I believed that too. Every time I felt a small, unexplainable distance between us, I convinced myself it was just stress or timing, or life moving too fast. I never imagined it was something deeper. The day everything shifted started out like any other. A cold afternoon on Pearl Street, the sky washed in slate gray, the breeze sharp enough to sting my ears. I had run out to pick up a few groceries before the weekend. I remember the hum of voices around me, the scrape of shoes on the pavement, and the metallic clatter of a bike chain from somewhere nearby. Then, in the flash of a second movement blurred in my peripheral vision, a cyclist swerved too close. I jumped back, my foot slipped, and my head cracked against the edge of the curb. The world blinked out before I even had time to curse. When I woke up, I knew something was wrong before my eyes fully opened. It wasn't pain. It was the silence, complete suffocating silence. I couldn't hear the beeping machines or hospital carts or even my own breath. Just a thick, terrifying quiet pressing around me. Dr. Jensen Patel explained slowly, letting me read the shape of every word: temporary sensorineural hearing loss. He said it could be days, weeks, maybe longer. I nodded like I understood, but inside panic clawed at me. Not being able to hear felt like being cut out of the world. Marissa came into the room holding my hand, her lips forming sentences I couldn't catch. She looked worried, but it was a distant kind of worry, the kind you show when people are watching. I tried to smile, tried to anchor myself to her presence, but even then something felt off. Still, when we returned home, I clung to the ways she tried to help slow speech so I could read her lips, careful notes left on the counter, the transcription app she used to make things easier. I told myself this was love in motion. I told myself she was doing her best. But the first spark of doubt appeared quietly, the way most truths do. One evening I walked into the living room and saw Marissa on the phone, laughing in a way I hadn't heard, or rather hadn't seen, in weeks. Her shoulders loose, her face bright. When she noticed me, the smile vanished instantly, replaced by a tight, polite expression. She locked her phone and pretended she'd just been checking email. I couldn't hear a thing, but something in her eyes made my stomach twist. A kind of lightness that had nothing to do with me. I tried to let it go, but that moment stayed with me long after I went to bed, a quiet thorn I couldn't pull out. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the unraveling, the first warning that the silence in my life wasn't just in my ears. It was in my marriage too, and soon enough it would swallow everything I thought I knew. The shift in Marissa didn't happen all at once. It was slow, subtle, like a room dimming without anyone turning off the lights. At first she seemed tired, distracted, impatient in ways I tried to rationalize. But as days passed, her behavior sharpened. She stopped facing me when she talked, her words spilling over her shoulder so I couldn't read her lips. When I gestured for her to repeat something, she sighed with the heavy annoyance of someone being burdened. I found myself shrinking around her, careful not to ask for too much, careful not to need more than she wanted to give. One night I caught something that deepened the knot in my chest. Marissa sat curled on the sofa, a glow from her phone lighting her face. She looked peaceful, almost happy, her expression softer than anything she'd shown me since the accident. But the second I stepped closer, she flinched and locked the screen. She pretended she'd been checking work emails, but her eyes told a different story. I noticed the way she always placed her phone face down afterward, a new habit she never had before. Because I couldn't hear, I started relying on every other sense, patterns, expressions, shifts in body language. I wrote everything down in a notebook the night she came home later than usual, the subtle brightness in her face after certain phone calls, the way her voice moved differently depending on who she was talking to, even though all I had to rely on were her lips and posture. My notebook grew thicker each day, filled with tiny observations that didn't feel like much alone, but together painted a picture I didn't want to look at. And then came the moment that cut deeper than I expected. One night she thought I was asleep. I lay there, eyes closed, while her silhouette moved across the room. She spoke quietly into the darkness, not realizing I was awake enough to watch her mouth. "He's so quiet now. No questions. No arguments. I'm getting used to it." The words weren't sharp or angry. They were resigned, relieved. I didn't understand the full meaning, but the tone behind them hit me like a bruise. I felt something slip inside me, a quiet fear that maybe she preferred me this way. Maybe the man she married wasn't the man she wanted anymore. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself stress made people say strange things. But doubt has a way of rooting itself before you notice, and soon it was everywhere, creeping into the spaces between us. I still wanted to believe in her, to believe that whatever was happening was temporary. Yet every instinct in me whispered that something was shifting under the surface, something I hadn't seen clearly, something that would soon rise whether I was ready or not. And that was how the unraveling continued, silent, steady, and impossible to ignore. Marissa told me her mother would stay with us for a few days to help around the house, though the way she said it made it sound more like a decision than a suggestion. When Evelyn Hale stepped through our front door, she wore a smile stretched too wide to be sincere. She cupped my face gently and said I was brave, resilient, even admirable, but the way her eyes lingered on me carried something closer to pity than affection. It wasn't the warm kind of pity either. It was sharp, almost condescending, as if she were evaluating some damaged piece of furniture Marissa had chosen to keep. The truth started slipping through her lips sooner than I expected. One morning, while Marissa was at work, Evelyn walked past me in the kitchen humming to herself. She thought I wasn't paying attention. Maybe she thought a man who couldn't hear was incapable of understanding anything at all, but I could read her mouth clearly as she muttered, "He's becoming a shadow." Then, with a small, dismissive shake of her head, "If Tyler were the son-in-law, things would be different." I froze mid-motion. Tyler. That name had dust on it in our marriage, Marissa's ex, a topic she never willingly revisited. Seeing it tumble from Evelyn's mouth so casually sent a ripple of unease through me. Later that day, I wrote in my notebook she mentioned Tyler again. I stared at the words longer than I meant to. I didn't want to think about him, but the more I tried to push it down, the more it clawed its way back into my mind. There had always been a stiffness in Marissa's voice when she talked about him, a slight tension in her posture. Now I wondered if it was because she had never fully let that chapter close. My unease only grew when Evelyn's mask slipped entirely. We were alone in the living room. She sat with one leg crossed over the other, her face angled away from me so she could speak freely. Her voice was low, but her lips shaped every word with brutal clarity. "Marissa was never meant to be with someone like you. You're holding each other back." I kept my expression blank, feigning confusion, pretending her words didn't land. In reality, they dug deep, echoing all the insecurities I had tried so hard to quiet. That afternoon, as I walked down the hall, I caught her speaking on speakerphone. She didn't face me, didn't even lower her voice. Her lips formed the sentences cleanly enough for me to catch every meaning. "He still suspects nothing. Marissa just needs a little more time." My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. A little more time for what I stepped back before she turned around as if the floor beneath me had started to tilt. By the time I closed the door to my room, I knew this wasn't just about Marissa dissolving into distance. Her mother wasn't just a visitor. She was a participant, a driver. And whatever they were hiding from me was bigger than mood swings and cold shoulders. I had only seen the surface. Whatever lay beneath was darker, more deliberate, and far more dangerous to the life I thought I was living. The morning Marissa walked past me without meeting my eyes, murmuring something over her shoulder that I had no chance of reading. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't just her tone or her impatience. It was the casual dismissal, the way she made me feel invisible in my own home. I stood there watching her move through the kitchen as if I were nothing more than background scenery, and realized she no longer saw me as a partner. I was becoming exactly what Evelyn had called me, a shadow. Her absences grew longer after that. She started leaving the house early, returning late, always offering vague explanations about meetings in Denver or last-minute client emergencies. I couldn't hear her conversations, but I studied her face when she answered her phone. Her lips curved into a softness I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Her eyes brightened. Her voice rose slightly, even though I could only see it forming at the edge of her mouth. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One night I stood half hidden in the hallway as she paced the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. I watched her mouth shape words that felt like small knives slicing through the air. "Miss you." Followed by, "Do you think he knows?" And then, "I can't wait to see you again." My stomach tightened with a mixture of disbelief and dread. I wanted to tell myself I misread her lips, but her expression said otherwise. Lighter, freer, almost glowing. The name Tyler floated back into my mind again, unwelcome but impossible to shake. What Evelyn had said, what I had seen in Marissa's smile, the strange silences between us, it all began to feel connected. I retraced her recent excuses, her adjusted schedules, the sudden need to be in Denver so often. And as I pieced it together, the fractures in our marriage no longer felt accidental. They felt intentional. Days later, while picking up clutter in her home office, I opened a drawer and found a stack of papers clipped neatly together. My eyes fell on the title, "Power of Attorney, Draft." My breath caught. The space for the designated agent bore Marissa's full name. The property referenced below was the Aspen Property Trust, my mother's inheritance, the one thing I had left from her. A cold wave washed through me. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them, my hands stiff and trembling. It wasn't just infidelity I was fearing now. It was something larger, more calculated. But I was trapped in a strange kind of silence, not just the literal one. I couldn't confront her without exposing that I had seen too much, understood too much. And I couldn't risk revealing that I was starting to suspect everything. If I did, whatever they were planning would shift, grow hidden, become harder to uncover. Each morning after that, I watched her more closely. Every departure, every return, every glance at her phone. The distance between us felt like a canyon, but I stayed where I was, pretending, observing, waiting. The woman I had trusted with my life now felt like someone I didn't recognize, someone with secrets pulsing just beneath her skin. And for the first time since we'd married, I felt afraid, not of being alone, but of the person I shared my home with, of what she might be capable of when she thought I couldn't hear, couldn't understand, couldn't fight back. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how deep it would cut. The more the days stretched on, the more I realized I couldn't afford to rely on hope or denial anymore. I needed facts, patterns, proof. So I built a system for myself, something structured enough to keep my mind steady in the middle of the chaos I couldn't hear. I started recording the exact times Marissa left the house, the way her mouth formed certain phrases when she thought I wasn't watching, the way her expression shifted when she returned home and saw me sitting there. She tried to hide it, but the glow on her face after some of her trips was unmistakable. None of it felt sudden. It felt practiced, familiar, like she'd been living a second life just beneath the surface. Evelyn, meanwhile, stopped pretending this was my home, too. She began rearranging things around the living room, moving objects, like she was preparing the space for someone else entirely. One afternoon, I walked into the dining room to find her going through a stack of my documents, holding up pages related to the Aspen property as if she were appraising merchandise. Her mouth moved in a small, satisfied line as she murmured to herself, "We need him to sign before he gets his hearing back." The words hit me harder than I expected, making the back of my neck prickle with cold. She wasn't even cautious. She simply assumed I was cut off from the world, powerless to interfere. Later that evening, I opened my laptop for work, and the shared photo library automatically synced. A new image appeared, Marissa standing beside Tyler at a gym in Denver, the two of them angled close, not posing, but clearly caught in a comfortable moment. Her face was soft in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I stared at the photo long enough for my vision to blur. I didn't need to hear anything to understand what that expression meant. That night, while I stood near the staircase, I caught another conversation between Marissa and her mother. Marissa leaned in close, her voice low, her words leaving her mouth slowly enough for me to read them. "He's predictable. He trusts me without question." She sounded certain, confident. Evelyn nodded, her lips curling with satisfaction. "Do it quickly. Once the Aspen house is under your name, you can live however you want with Tyler." I gripped the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was strategy coordination, and the worst kind of deceit. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a collapsing ceiling. They weren't simply drifting away from me. They were moving towards something else, something built on my silence, my vulnerability, the very disability I was trying to adapt to. I thought of my mother, of the trust she'd placed in me by leaving me the house in Aspen, the land she had cherished. I wondered what she would say if she saw me now, standing by while the people closest to me plotted to take what she had worked her whole life for. The fear I once felt slowly began to shift into something steadier. I understood now that I wasn't helpless. My silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. They mistook it for surrender. I started planning, thinking through every move with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. If they wanted to use my condition to their advantage, they would never see what was coming. By the end of that night, I wrote one final sentence in my notebook. "Silence isn't the cage they are." And with that realization, I began gathering everything I needed, every detail, every slip of their mouths, saving it all, like a man preparing for a storm he finally knows how to face. When the day of my follow-up appointment arrived, I felt a strange mix of dread and hope. I had grown used to living inside a muted world, but part of me still craved the sound of footsteps, voices, even the dull hum of traffic. Dr. Patel ran a series of tests, watching my reactions closely. Then he gave me a small, relieved smile and told me my hearing had fully returned. For a moment, I felt weightless, like I had been pulled out of a deep pool of water. But the relief didn't last. The second he asked if I was ready to tell my family, my heart tightened. I shook my head, pretending I needed time to adjust, but the truth was clearer than ever. I wasn't ready to tell Marissa a thing. Not until I knew everything she was capable of when she thought I was defenseless. On the drive home, she picked me up with her usual mix of rushed politeness and feigned concern. When her phone buzzed in the console, I actually heard the vibration. She didn't even look at me before flipping the screen over. The name Tyler Brooks flashed just long enough for me to register it. My pulse kicked in my throat, but I kept my face blank, staring out the window as if the world still sounded like nothing to me. That night, I stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, pretending to search through the fridge while listening to their voices drifting down the hall. "Once he signs the authorization, it'll all be yours," Marissa's mother said in a clipped, satisfied tone. "Tyler won't have to wait much longer." Marissa exhaled a mixture of nerves and excitement. "He thinks I'm taking care of him. He has no idea." I felt my stomach clench. Hearing them speak so freely in that kitchen, a space I once considered safe, made the house itself feel contaminated. A few moments later, Marissa's voice rose again. "Being with someone who can't hear is easier than I thought. No questions, no pressure, no fights. Honestly, if he never gets his hearing back, it wouldn't be the worst thing." I froze behind the refrigerator door, gripping it so tightly my fingers ached. I had spent weeks grieving the loss of sound, feeling useless, ashamed. To hear the woman I loved wish it would last made something inside me splinter. Then Evelyn spoke up again, her tone harder. She talked about legal documents, about how someone in my condition could be persuaded to sign anything without understanding it. She said they should move quickly, use the situation to secure the Aspen property before I recovered. I didn't need to hear every detail to grasp the full picture. They intended to use my condition against me, turning my vulnerability into a loophole. Later that night, as Marissa walked through the hallway, her phone still in her hand, she didn't realize the call with Tyler hadn't fully disconnected. His voice slipped through the speaker just long enough for me to hear him say, "I'll wait. Just make sure everything is in place." Her response was quiet but confident. "It's almost done. I'm clearing the path." It felt like someone had reached into my chest and twisted, but oddly the pain gave way to clarity. For the first time, I wasn't frozen. I wasn't confused. I wasn't trying to explain their behavior or give them excuses. Everything aligned: the late nights, the tension, the impatience, the secrecy. My silence had given them room to reveal themselves. Now it was time for me to take control. I retrieved a small recorder I had ordered online under the guise of needing tools for work. I slipped it inside my jacket pocket, programmed to capture every word they spoke around me. I made digital copies of documents they thought I never saw. I uploaded everything to cloud storage with backups in separate accounts. The plan wasn't revenge. It was protection for my future, my inheritance, and my sanity. That night, as I watched Marissa walk across the living room, the woman I once loved felt like a stranger wearing her face. I whispered under my breath, knowing she couldn't hear it from across the room. When I speak again, everything changes. The morning everything finally broke open felt heavier than any day before it. I woke up in the same house where I had spent weeks drowning in silence, yet this time every sound was painfully clear. The distant hum of the heater, the soft clatter of a spoon against a mug, the crisp flip of a newspaper page. Marissa was pouring coffee in the kitchen. Evelyn sat nearby, rustling through the headlines as if she had lived there for years. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and felt the recorder inside the tool that would end the life they thought they had under control. When I stepped into the kitchen, they both turned toward me. Their faces were calm, casual, even bored. They still believed I was trapped in silence. Marissa smiled faintly and spoke with her back, slightly turned, her lips forming the words slowly, almost carelessly. "What do you want for breakfast?" she asked, as if nothing in our marriage had changed. I watched her for a moment, letting that image sink in, the woman who had once been my entire world, treating me like background noise. I placed my coffee down on the counter with a soft tap. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady when I finally said it. "I can hear again." The room froze. Marissa stopped breathing for half a second. Evelyn's newspaper slipped from her hands. Both of them stared as if a ghost had spoken. Marissa stepped toward me, her face twisting into something she tried to disguise as relief. "Noah." "What did you say?" Her voice trembled, but I had heard enough lies to recognize another one coming. "I can hear," I repeated. "I have been able to hear for 3 days." And I heard everything. Her face drained of color. She reached for my arm, but I pulled it back. Evelyn stepped in, trying to regain control. "Sweetheart, you misunderstood. We were only worried about you." "No." I cut sharply. "You wanted me to sign away the Aspen property because you thought I was helpless." The truth hit her like a slap. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. I pulled out my phone, opened the recording, and hit play. Their own voices filled the kitchen, Marissa's cold tone saying she wished I'd never hear again, Evelyn pushing her to get the signatures, Tyler's name woven into the conversation, like a secret they had stopped caring to hide. The sound felt surreal, like listening to the autopsy of my marriage. When the recording ended, Marissa broke first, not with regret but fury. "She pushed me," she yelled, pointing at Evelyn. "You think I wanted this? I've been miserable, Noah. Miserable. You don't know what it's like living with someone who needs everything spelled out, repeated, slowed down." I stared at her, unable to recognize the woman in front of me. "I lost my hearing, Marissa. I didn't stop being your husband." Her face twisted with frustration, not shame. "You weren't enough for me anymore," she snapped. "I tried, I really did." But Tyler, right on cue, her phone rang on the countertop. The name Tyler Brooks lit up the screen. Evelyn's eyes widened. Marissa lunged for it, but I reached it faster and held it up. The truth stared back at both of them. She silenced the call quickly, but there was nothing left to hide. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm leaving today, and the next time either of you hear from me, it will be through a lawyer." I walked upstairs, grabbed my suitcase, and headed down the stairs past the two women who had spent weeks plotting my future without me. Marissa tried to speak again, her voice shaking, but it wasn't love she was trying to hold on to, only the fear of losing what she thought she could take. I stepped outside without looking back. Silence used to terrify me. That morning it finally set me free. Keegan's truck pulled into the driveway minutes after I called. He didn't ask questions. He just opened the passenger door and let me slide in with my suitcase. As we drove away from Boulder, I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror. Marissa stood on the porch, wrapped in a panic I no longer felt responsible for. Whatever life remained in that home was no longer mine. In Denver, I walked into the office of attorney Lyle Crowell with a folder full of evidence. I handed him everything: the recordings, the photos of the Aspen documents, the detailed notebook I had kept since the accident. He studied the material with the kind of focus that made me believe for the first time in a long time that I wasn't fighting alone. "This is more than enough," he said. "What they planned qualifies as exploitation of a medical condition and attempted property coercion. We'll handle the rest." Within days, Marissa received a notice restricting her access to any property under my name. Evelyn was formally included in the case for assisting and encouraging her. Their calls poured in like a storm, at first pleading, apologizing, bargaining, but I blocked them all. I didn't owe them the sound of my voice anymore. A mutual friend later sent me photos of Marissa and Tyler together, pictures of them in Denver, taken during the exact time she told me she was attending work meetings. It didn't hurt the way I expected. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew: the betrayal hadn't been a sudden wound. It had been a slow, weeks-long decay. When I reached Aspen, I opened the safe my mother left me. Inside was a letter she wrote years ago, something she had intended for me to read when I was ready. The words stopped me cold. "Strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how firmly you stand when everything around you is quiet." I sat there for a long time, holding the letter, letting the weight of it settle into me. My silence, once forced, once frightening, had become the thing that saved me. It had given me time to see who truly stood beside me, and who never had. I rented a small cabin nestled between the pine trees, surrounded by snow-dusted mountains. For the first time in months, I woke up without dread. I started therapy, refocused on my work, learned to enjoy my own company. The quiet no longer felt like a cage, just space to rebuild. 2 months later, the legal process wrapped up. The ruling was clear: I kept every piece of my mother's property. Marissa lost access to all shared assets. Evelyn was barred from interfering in any capacity. Their plans had folded in on themselves. I stood on the cabin's porch the day the case closed, watching the sun stretch across the mountain peaks. The cold air stung my lungs, but it felt clean, like a new beginning, instead of an ending. Looking back at everything that had happened, I realized something simple and sharp. The moment I heard again didn't just return sound to my world, it returned the truth. And with that truth, I stepped forward, ready to become someone I had never allowed myself to be before. Whole, unbroken, and finally unmistakably free. When the legal dust finally settled, and the house in Aspen was undeniably mine again, I expected to feel triumphant. I thought victory would come with fireworks, with some loud, defining sense of justice snapping into place. But standing there on the porch of my cabin, the wind brushing against my face and the forests stretching endlessly before me, I realized something different. Closure doesn't roar. It arrives quietly, like the last snowfall of the season, soft but unmistakable. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was release. For weeks after leaving Boulder, I kept replaying everything that had happened: the accident, the silence, the whispers, the lies, the betrayal, woven so neatly into the fabric of my everyday life. And every time I thought about it, I wondered how long they would have continued if I had never regained my hearing. How far it would have gone. How deeply they believed I would remain blind to the world as long as I was deaf to it. It took me time to understand that what hurt me most wasn't what they planned to take from me. It was what I had been willing to give them. Trust, commitment, loyalty. I had been ready to fight for my marriage, even when my world had fallen completely silent. Meanwhile, they had been planning how to rearrange their lives without me in it. They saw my silence as a weakness. They couldn't imagine it becoming the thing that exposed them. Some nights I still think about the moment I told Marissa I could hear again the way every lie she'd ever spoken seemed to collapse at once. Part of me wonders whether she ever loved me in the way I tried to love her. Whether she ever meant the promises she made. Whether she ever looked at me without comparing me to the man she wished she'd married instead. But those questions don't keep me awake anymore. They're echoes in another house, another lifetime. Out here in Aspen, surrounded by the mountains my mother adored. I've started learning how to live with a different kind of quiet. A peaceful one. The kind you choose, not the kind forced upon you. Therapy helped. Long hikes helped. Long hikes. Even the slow, solitary mornings where the only sound I hear is the crackle of a fire have helped. Healing, it turns out, doesn't arrive all at once. It's a series of tiny decisions, stepping outside instead of staying in bed, cooking a real meal instead of skipping dinner, answering a friend's message instead of retreating inward. Small choices, steady progress. The more I healed, the more I realized something else. What happened to me isn't rare. Betrayal, manipulation, emotional neglect, they happen quietly behind closed doors when no one is watching. Sometimes they happen in marriages everyone else assumes are perfect. Sometimes the deepest hurt comes from the people we trust most. And maybe that's why I wanted to tell this story. Not for revenge, not for sympathy, but because silence, whether literal or emotional, can isolate you in ways you don't notice until it's too late. Because the same way I couldn't hear the world around me, there are people right now who can't hear the truth about their own lives. Not because they're deaf, but because someone is working very hard to keep them in the dark. If you're one of those people, if you're sitting somewhere listening to this and feeling a strange heaviness in your chest, because something about my story mirrors your own, please know this. You're not weak for trusting. You're not naive for loving. And you're not alone for hurting. What matters isn't how long you stayed. It's that you found the strength to leave, or to confront the truth, or simply to admit that something isn't right. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is listen to the quiet corners of your own intuition. And if you're in a season of rebuilding like I was, I hope you give yourself grace. Rebuilding isn't fast. It isn't pretty. But piece by piece, day by day, the life you imagine starts taking shape. The air gets easier to breathe. Year two. The morning feels lighter. You wake up and realize you survived something you once thought would break you. Thank you for staying with me through this story, through this journey from silence to truth. And before I go, I want to know that you're here with me, not just as listeners, but as people who understand how fragile and how strong the human heart can be. If you're listening right now, drop a simple "I'm here" in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Sometimes knowing someone out there hears you is enough to make the world feel a little less heavy. And if this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but because somewhere out there another story is waiting, another truth, another voice that deserves to be heard. And I'd love for you to be here when I share it. I may not know what comes next in my life, but I do know this: the moment I took back my hearing, I took back my future. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find your moment too. And as I stand here now, breathing in the cold mountain air, I realize something I never understood before. Sometimes life has to go quiet for you to finally hear yourself. Losing my hearing forced me to face truths I might have ignored forever. It stripped away the noise, the distractions, the excuses. It showed me who stood beside me and who only stayed as long as it benefited them. And strangely enough, I'm grateful for that clarity. Because without it, I might still be living in that house, convincing myself that love meant shrinking so someone else could feel bigger. I might still be apologizing for needs I'm allowed to have, questions I'm allowed to ask, emotions I'm allowed to feel. Now when the wind rushes through the trees or snow settles quietly on the branches, I hear every bit of it, and none of it feels empty anymore. It feels like a reminder that even after being broken open, life has a way of filling you with something new. So if you're out there rebuilding too, take your time. Let each breath be proof that you made it through. And if you feel like sharing even a small part of your journey, my comments are open. Sometimes a single sentence from a stranger can be the thing that reminds you you're still standing. Thank you again for listening. I hope in some way my story helps you find the strength to write your own.